behind all of these discourses or theories has to be an understanding of discourse itself, right? Now, historically, discourse as a term was used in English language uh, when we wanted to say any kind of learned discussion about any topic. That was what we were discoursing, or that was considered a discourse. But that all changes post Michel Foucault, right? And Hayden White, but mostly Michel Foucault, because after Foucault, the term discourse almost pretty much replaces ideology, but it takes on a different connotation, a different meaning, right? So I think in order for us to understand what exactly are different discourses in literary and linguistic studies, we first need to kind of have an understanding of what discourse, according to Foucault, could be or is, to the best of our understanding. And the best book in which Foucault himself explains what he means by discourse is Archaeology of Knowledge, right? Because in that he is trying to explain in the beginning what is discourse, and he says, he starts with, we have to do some negative work. In sciences, negative work is when you eliminate certain obvious explanations of any phenomenon. So what he does is, in the beginning of the book, he dismisses certain simplistic understandings of the discourse. So he famously starts with, it's not a sentence. It's not a proposition, right? So what he's getting at is discourse for Foucault, right? And there are certain claims that he makes in that book. And one of them is that discourse is material, right? And it impacts literally our bodies and shapes our souls as well. But it has no central locus. So overall, then, what he means is that discourse, in a way, is a body of knowledge, produced by experts, produced by institutions, right? Accepted by people within that scientific community as the norm, right? It has its practitioners, people who learn the discourse and practice it. They are the ones he calls the enunciating subjects. And then a discourse then also produces its own objects of study. Right? It's that production of objects which is really important. So overall, then, a body of knowledge, scientific in nature, or at least claiming some degree of scientificity, accepted by experts as scientific knowledge, and then perpetuated through the institutions, through journals, conferences, as a body of knowledge that shapes our ways of receiving things or accepting or not accepting things. And so one person cannot start a discourse, or one person cannot be the source of discourse. For discourse to be discourse, it has to be, spread across a landscape or across a discipline, right? So that's why I have a problem when people use colonial discourse analysis and Fairclough and all, because those people are like, here is the beginning point and here is the end point. The beauty of discourse is that you cannot trace it to its source. It's diffuse. And it kind of replaces ideology, right? But if you look at Foucault's language in that book, when he's talking about a discourse as material, that's exactly what Althusser, who was his teacher, says about ideology, that ideology is material. And what he means by it, and he says in his essay, that that by saying that ideology is material, I don't mean that it's like a shovel or a stone, but it is material because it has an apparatus, right? An apparatus that is run by institutions, by powerful constituencies, by knowledge producing bodies, and then it forces people or encourages people to shape their bodies in this world according to that discourse. So it has a material impact, right? And think of it, I mean, a simplest example of it, you all live in Pakistan. Men don't have to worry much about it. But the religious discourse, where you live, depending on where you live in Pakistan, the cultural and religious discourse, without even telling you what to do, shapes women's public appearances, makes them behave a certain way, makes them dress a certain way. That is the power of the discourse. At the end of the day, no one is saying when you go out, you should wear a chadar or you should do hijab. It is the power of the discourse, sometimes internalized and sometimes coercive, right? So when we teach discourses, any political, we can come to it through rhetorics, and we can teach it rhetorically, and we can also come to it through Foucault. But to teach any kind of discourse, political discourse or cultural discourse, we will have to first ground our students in an understanding of discourse itself, and especially discourse as discussed, explained, and theorized by Michel Foucault. So that's why I highly recommend reading Archaeology of Knowledge. The beautiful thing about Foucault, unlike Derrida and others, and Deleuze and others, is Foucault is very easy to understand. Once you get into the translated works, that's all we have access to. And he's very eloquent, but he's also funny. So I will highly recommend reading it. Now, in your context, if you're teaching literature or anything that you pick up, what we call literary theories or theoretical practices, new criticism, structuralism, post-structuralism, they are also discourses, right? Because they have a body of knowledge. They have people who have produced books on them. We internalize that knowledge, we teach it, there is institutional prestige behind it, and then we understand that those tools can enable us to read or teach literature a certain way or write about it a certain way, right? And so that leads us to an understanding of the idea of the discursive. A lot of people use it. So a discursive understanding of the world is that if we buy into this idea that most of what we feel and do in the world is an outcome of the discourses that we inhabit or that shape us, then most of our experience of the world is discursive. We experience it the way we do and think about it the way we do because we are in a given discourse. We are part of it, or we are objects of it, or maybe we are enunciating subjects in it. And there are very few non-discursive experiences. Maybe like if someone is literally torturing us, maybe that is an experience on the level of the body. But beyond that, our understanding of the world is discursive. We always look at it either from a standpoint of where we are, or we try to understand it through an understanding of a discourse of economy, politics, religion. So even before you and I speak, our words are spoken for us by the discourse in which we are in. And it shapes our worldview. So when you teach these discourses, here is the problem which I see, and I've become actually more vocal about these things because I don't think so we have the time, especially in the Pakistani context, to not confront these issues. We have wasted 70 years already. So the problem with teaching in Pakistan, let's say if you're teaching a discourse, I'm going to teach you political discourse, is that we put slides on the screen and we say, here are the 7 things about political discourse, right? And here are 10 things about Derrida, and here are 15 things about Foucault. And the students just learn that, what are the 10 attributes of political discourse? And then they reproduce it in a test. What we don't teach them, and I hope all of you do, what I've noticed, what they're not taught is, where does it come from? If Foucault said so, why? What is he responding to? What is the deep philosophical lineage of these concepts and terms? And why does it matter to know it in the world, right? These are the things, and that is the teaching discourse, right? Discourse of pedagogy. So if you are in a teaching position and you are working within the paradigm or discourse of just teaching as delivery of content, then that's how you will teach. If you kind of step aside a little bit and develop into what we call the discourse of critical pedagogy, then you will look at education differently. Then it's not content delivery, right? Then it's helping our students understand the world better, think critically about it, and then try to do something to change it, right? Here's another thing that all these discourses do. They over-determine the way we behave in the world, the way we treat other people, the way we think of other people. So think of religious discourse. If done correctly, it can make us into the most humble, caring, and accepting people, right? Religion has the power to do so if you are into that discourse. So if you look at the Islamic history, there are so many major strains of Islam, but the mystical, the Sufi tradition, if you are familiar with Ibn Arabi and then all the Persian Sufi poets, they are using the same religion, but they are building what Ibn al-Arabi called muhibba, right? Love as the main concept of the religion, right? They're using the same sources, but the discourse that they develop is of love, care, and kindness. And so people who are following their tradition then see the world through, because that discourse determines their worldview. And on the other hand, we have another discourse followed by the Taliban and all the others. They are also using the same sources, but the discourse that they have adopted is of othering and of judgment, right? And of sanctioning people and physically forcing them to become a Muslim, right? Or live whatever they think is a Muslim lifestyle. So the practice differs because they are in two different discourses of the same religion, right? One foregrounds the teachings, the literatures, the philosophies, that's the body of knowledge that foregrounds love. The other foregrounds adherence to the rules, right? So they have their own teachers and philosophers and interpreters and writers, and those are the enunciating subjects, because when they speak in public or in private, they take upon themselves to become figures who have the power to pronounce things. Right? That's the power of discourse. At the end of the day, it determines who we are and how we look at the world. So when you teach discourses, let's say you want to teach political discourse, how to understand politics. Part of it will have to be an understanding of politics. How does it work, right? An understanding of rhetoric, what kind of rhetorical strategies are employed. Part of it would be also understanding how the figure of the other is created or absolutely needed, right? How emotions are used. And then part of it will also have to be, understanding of what discourse is this group of politicians in, right? What narratives, what stories are they telling? And who are their enunciating subjects? Who are their experts, right? Who are the journalists who are caught within their discourse? Because it's never just one person, right? It's a web, and it has specialists, it has people in the street, it has a spokesperson who could be considered a leader. But at the end of the day, what is a leader? A leader is him or herself caught within the discourse. There are moments where people who are leaders of popular organizations are their own people repudiate them because the people have internalized the logic of the discourse. And they are like, well, you were for this and now you are for that, right? Because the discourse then starts determining what people expect, right? And so this is my understanding of discourse and what constitutes being discursive and how to employ it. Now, last time when we had face-to-face meetings, we did talk about critical pedagogy. And part of it is also in pedagogy. My former colleague and friend Mark Brocker also talks about what kind of teaching discourses are there. So, for example, he talks about the discourse of the master, the discourse of the discipline, and then the discourse of the activist or the hysteric, right? And these are the three models that we see over here. The discourse of the master is if Masood Raja walks into the classroom and says, I'm really cool, I know all these things. If you want to become good scholars, just follow my lead and, become like me, right? So that's the discourse of the master because the teacher is offering his or herself as a role model to be followed. And all the students need to do is just take the cue and just spew out what the teacher wants and model themselves on the figure of the teacher. And it can be a very destructive discourse. The discourse of the discipline is where we basically tell people, if you want to be a linguist, you need to know this, this, and this. And if you have mastered those, and if you can show that you have mastered those, you have now become a scholar. The discourse of the hysteric is what we activist professors do, like the leftists and others. We just want to jolt our students and make them angry and revolutionary. And that's also destructive because the students in our class who may not agree with our politics will feel threatened and will not listen to us. These are like the three destructive discourses of pedagogy. And against that, what Brocker offers is the model of the analyst and the analyzer from Lacan. The idea is that you, me, and I, we bring the texts to our class and we develop trust with our students. And we let them figure out through a reading of the text about how do they feel about it, why, what do they feel about it and why, and then just talk about it. And we just give them a little bit of knowledge and a few tools but we don't privilege one way of looking at it or the other, because the idea isn't that we are giving them knowledge. The knowledge they can find on their phones, right? There is nothing they cannot look up. What we are trying to give them is enabling them to develop stronger pro-social identities. Identities that are strong enough to take a different point of view, look at it from a different point of view, and then they can go out into the world, and it won't matter if the person they're talking to is from a different race, or if a person they're talking to is from a different class or from a politically different, ideology. They will be, because all of this comes from fear, a threat to their identities. So the idea is that we do the kind of pedagogy that strengthens our students' idea of self and their identities. And that's also another discourse of teaching. So these are some of the things that I understand about, discourse, discursive frameworks, and how do they apply to our work, and how do we teach it.